Eleanor McCrae's gaze, narrowed against the ascending sun, was framed by a hand gnarled by sun and toil. Though still distant, the approaching riders were an inevitability. Days she'd watched the dust devils spin their frantic dance and felt the land itself vibrate with a subtle warning of approaching disruption. Her old Winchester, a legacy from Thomas, offered a chilling comfort in her grasp, not fired in anger since his absence silenced any voice of restraint. Now, the cold metal was a bulwark against the encroaching threat. Silhouetted in the ranch house doorway, she was a small, defiant counterpoint to the vast New Mexico territory. The relentless wind worried her faded calico and flung silvered strands of hair across her cheek. Unforgiving, perhaps, but this land was hers, earned through years of backbreaking work, purchased with sweat and staunchly unshed tears. Eleanor retreated indoors, seeking solace in the dwelling's dim interior. Sparsely furnished, the single room served as a testament to a life forged from adversity. A scarred table dominated the space, bearing the ghostly imprints of solitary meals. An eternally coffee-stained enamel pot resided on the stove. Upon the cot in the corner, a patchwork quilt lay neatly folded, a mosaic of salvaged memories. Sunlight lanced through the dusty window, spotlighting a collection of objects on the mantle. A tarnished silver locket held a faded image of Thomas, youthful optimism etched on his face. A shattered pocket watch, frozen at his moment of death during a senseless war skirmish. Above the hearth, a Civil War saber hung, a cold echo of a conflict that had cleaved the nation, and her, in two. Each object served as a tangible link to an unescapable past, a constant echo of loss. They were silent specters, inhabiting the quiet of the house, a somber chorus of grief. To discard them would be to relinquish the very essence of who she was. She crossed to the cold hearth, boots crunching on the packed earth floor. Long extinguished, the fire pit held only gray ash. She recalled a time when it had pulsed with life, radiating warmth and the phantom sounds of children she would never know. Now, just another bleak reminder of her profound solitude. A fly, thick with sluggish persistence, buzzed against the window pane, caught between the confines of glass and the boundless world beyond. She watched its desperate struggle, seeing a reflection of her own plight. Life on the ranch was a monotonous rhythm of labor, a lonely pas de deux with the terrain. Dawn demanded the milking of cows, the feeding of chickens, the constant repair of fences. The days involved herding the meager cattle stock, coaxing life into the arid fields, and defending against ceaseless drought and disease. Evenings brought mending clothes, reading by the wan glow of a kerosene lamp, and listening to the mournful ululation of distant coyotes. She seldom saw another soul. Redemption lay a hard day's ride away, visited only for crucial supplies or cattle sales. The townsfolk regarded her with suspicion and unease, wary of her self-reliance, her defiance of widowhood's expected demeanor. They offered condolences, their pity, but she craved neither. The isolation of the ranch, the camaraderie of the wind and whispering sage, was preferable. Sometimes, beneath the vast, glittering canopy of night, she would perch on the porch and converse with Thomas, relaying the events of her day, confiding her hopes and anxieties. The silence offered no response, but the act of invoking his name, preserving his memory, brought a measure of peace. From the moment she first spied the riders, she knew they heralded trouble. It wasn't only the roiling dust cloud or the grim set of their shoulders, but a deep, visceral premonition that settled like a stone in her stomach. Her tenuous tranquility was about to be violated. She glanced at the rifle, its cold steel a promise, however inadequate, of defense. Against such numbers, what could a lone woman accomplish? Weary, she was soul-weary of battling, of straining, of existing alone. But surrender was not an option, not without resistance. This land constituted her all, Thomas's heritage, her very existence. She would safeguard it until her last breath. She peered once more toward the horizon. The riders now possessed distinct forms, their intent yet veiled. The wind groaned through the chinks in the house's walls, a lament that echoed the barrenness within her. Closing her eyes briefly, she inhaled deeply, fortifying herself for the impending confrontation. The rifle felt substantial in her grip. She returned to the doorway, a dark figure outlined against the muted light within, and waited. The dust swirled, the riders drew nearer, and the murmurs of the past merged with the shadows of an uncertain future. The fallen warrior. The sun hammered at Eleanor's back as she walked the fence line, each step a small rebellion against the baking heat. Her gaze swept the sagging wire, a task for another day. Today, dread gnawed at her. The memory of riders silhouetted against the horizon, an unwelcome premonition. A blot of darkness near the creek snagged her attention, something other than the usual dry brush. Curiosity, a risky indulgence these days, urged her forward. The shape resolved into a man, splayed amongst the rocks, his copper skin a sharp contrast to the pale earth. Instinctively, her hand went to the Winchester, then paused. He lay still. She crept closer, rifle raised, spotting the shallow, uneven rise and fall of his chest. Apache. She recognized the hairstyle, the worn leather, and injured badly. A crimson stain bloomed on his side, soaking his shirt. Eleanor lowered the rifle, a war raging within her. He was an Apache wounded. Her neighbors would demand she abandon him to his fate, or worse. But leaving a man to die in the desert simply wasn't in her nature. She holstered the rifle and knelt, her movements economical. A touch to his neck revealed a faint, steady pulse. Alive but barely. He needed help, and quickly. "Blast it all," she muttered, the words of frustrated prayer. The creek bed offered scant refuge, only searing sun and jagged stone. She had to get him back to the ranch, but he was a large man, powerfully built even in his weakened state. Lifting him alone seemed impossible. "Easy," she breathed more to herself. She shifted him gently, assessing the wound, a clean but deep bullet hole. Tearing a strip from her petticoat, she winced at the loss and pressed it to the wound, hoping to stem the bleeding. Then came the near impossible. She strained to lever him up, muscles screaming, breath ragged. A soft groan escaped him, eyes fluttering open, then shut. His weight was a crushing burden. "Move it! Damn you!" she gritted out, face burning with exertion. She slung his arm around her shoulders, using his own weight against him. Inch by torturous inch, she dragged him upright. Her mule, Bess, waited patiently nearby, tail flicking at the insects. Eleanor knew riding was out of the question. She'd have to walk, leading Bess. With a final burst of strength, fueled by desperation and stubbornness, she managed to half-lift, half-shove him onto Bess's back. He slumped, head lolling against the mule's flank. She secured him with rope, praying he wouldn't fall. The trek back to the ranch was a slow, agonizing crawl. The relentless sun beat down, and the wounded man moaned with each jolt. Eleanor trudged beside Bess, legs leaden, throat parched. She focused on the next step, ignoring the doubts and fear. Finally, the ranch house appeared, a meager sanctuary against the vast, indifferent landscape. She led Bess in the barn, the cool dimness a balm. Unloading him was another ordeal, but somehow she eased him onto a pile of hay. Inside, Eleanor gathered supplies, water, bandages, her sewing kit. Her medical knowledge was limited, but she knew how to clean and close a wound. Skills born of necessity, tending to her own and her late husband's injuries. Back in the barn, she worked swiftly, cleansing the wound with water and whiskey, her hands surprisingly steady. He remained unconscious, face gaunt. Stitching the edges together, she noticed intricate tattoos on his arms, scars that whispered of battles. This was no ordinary Apache. This was a warrior. She finished, covering him with a blanket. He needed rest, and she needed a plan. She couldn't keep him here forever. The approaching riders were a real threat, and harboring an Apache, especially one of such obvious importance, would only worsen things. But turning him out was unthinkable. She'd offered aid, She was responsible. She gazed at his still form, the gentle rise and fall of his chest, and a strange determination settled within her. She would protect him until he could fend for himself, whatever the price. She didn't know his name, his story, but he was a man, hurt and helpless. And in this forsaken land, where compassion was scarce, that was all that mattered. Secrets and silence. Eleanor hummed a tuneless melody as she ground dried herbs into a paste, the pungent aroma filling the small cabin. Chaska lay on the cot in the corner, his dark eyes following her movements. The wound on his side was healing, the angry red fading to a dusky pink, thanks to her crude but careful tending. He still favored it, moving with a deliberate slowness, but the fever had broken days ago, leaving him gaunt but lucid. Communication remained a frustrating dance of gestures and expressions. Eleanor would point to objects, naming them in English, while Chaska would respond with a single nod or shake of his head. She learned to interpret the subtle shifts in his gaze, the slight tightening of his jaw, the almost imperceptible flicker of gratitude in his eyes. He was a study in stoicism, revealing nothing of his pain or his thoughts, yet she sensed a profound intelligence and an unwavering strength beneath his guarded exterior. She dipped a clean rag into the herbal paste and approached him. He watched her, his gaze unwavering, as she gently applied the poultice to his wound. He didn't flinch, but muscle twitched in his jaw. Eleanor met his eyes, a silent question passing between them. He gave the barest inclination of his head, acknowledging her care. One afternoon, Eleanor found him sitting up on the cot, meticulously braiding a piece of rawhide. He worked with a concentration that seemed to shut out the world, his long fingers moving with a practiced grace. When he finished, he held it out to her. It was a simple bracelet, the rawhide dyed a deep brown with berry juice. Eleanor took it, her fingers brushing his. A jolt, unexpected and unsettling, ran through her. She looked at the bracelet, then at him, her throat suddenly tight. He simply met her gaze, his expression unreadable. She slipped the bracelet onto her wrist. It felt rough against her skin, a tangible reminder of his presence, of their shared secret. Days bled into weeks. Eleanor's routine settled into a precarious balance, tending to the ranch during the day, nursing Chaska in secret at night. The silence of the cabin was punctuated by the rustling of straw, the crackling of the fire, and the occasional soft murmur of her voice as she spoke to him, even though he couldn't understand. She told him about her late husband, Thomas, about the hardships of ranching, about her dreams for a future she wasn't sure she'd ever see. Meanwhile, a different kind of murmur was spreading through the town of Harmony. Whispers carried on the wind, tales of missing cattle, of shadowy figures seen lurking near the outskirts of town. Fingers pointed towards the Apache, their names spoken with fear and resentment. One evening, Eleanor rode into Harmony to replenish her dwindling supplies. The general store was abuzz with nervous chatter. Old man Hemlock, the store owner, a man whose words dripped with venom, cornered her near the flour sacks. "Heard tell you been keeping to yourself lately, Eleanor," he said, his eyes narrowed. "Things are getting bad, real bad. Apache are getting bolder. Folks are saying they saw smoke signals coming from the hills. You best be careful out there, alone like you are." Eleanor met his gaze, her expression impassive. "I could take care of myself, Mr. Hemlock." "That's so? Well, some things are bigger than one woman can handle. We're thinking of forming a posse, track down these redskins before they cause any more trouble." "Has anyone actually seen an Apache?" Eleanor asked, her voice calm. Hemlock sputtered. "Well, not exactly seen, but everyone knows. Knows what they want to believe," Eleanor finished, picking up her sack of flour. "Thank you for your concern, Mr. Hemlock." As she rode back to the ranch, the weight of the rumors pressed down on her. She knew what they were implying, what they wanted to do, and she knew that Chaska, hidden in her cabin, was the target of their fear and prejudice. Back at the ranch, she found Chaska standing by the window, gazing out at the darkening landscape. He turned as she entered, his eyes questioning. She shook her head, offering him a tight, reassuring smile. He didn't smile back, but she saw a flicker of understanding in his eyes. He knew the danger was closing in. The secrets they shared, the silence that bound them, were becoming increasingly fragile, threatened by the growing storm of fear and suspicion. The deputy's visit. Heat shimmered above the plains, twisting the horizon where miniature cyclones spun skyward, indifferent to the tension gripping Eleanor. Her gaze tracked a lone rider etching closer, a figure sculpted from dust and distance. The dread wasn't of marauding warriors, but the creeping tendrils of distrust, tightening like a hangman's noose. The horseman halted at the edge of her hardscrabble yard, hooves churning up a gritty cloud. He was a greenhorn, barely out of his teens, a star badge askew on his chest, jaw working with nervous energy. Miller, the new deputy, freshly sworn in last spring. "Mornin', Mrs. McCrae," his voice cracked boyish. He touched his hat brim, eyes sweeping the premises, missing nothing. "Scorcher out here, ain't it? If you favor grit," Eleanor countered, her tone clipped. She offered neither respite nor water for his mount. He hadn't ridden out for a social call. "We've received some complaints, ma'am," the deputy began, shifting uncomfortably. "Whispers of Apache activity. Stolen livestock. Settlers are on edge." Eleanor crossed her arms, her gaze steady. "This is cattle country, deputy. Animal stray. Sometimes Apaches are to blame, sometimes predators, sometimes just misfortune." He cleared his throat, his gaze snagging on the barn. "These reports are specific, ma'am. Talk of a wounded brave. Someone offered sanctuary." Eleanor's pulse quickened, a trapped hummingbird fluttering against her ribs. She fought for composure. "I've seen no one, deputy, injured or otherwise. I've been occupied with my own affairs." The deputy's eyes narrowed, shedding their youthful softness. "Folks say you're a solitary woman, Mrs. McCrae, that you keep secrets to yourself." "I share what's needed," Eleanor retorted, an edge to her voice now. "This is my land. I'm entitled to privacy." He dismounted, the creak of saddle leather loud in the stillness. He advanced slowly, boots crunching on the parched ground. "Just try to maintain order, ma'am, ensuring everyone's security." He stopped a few paces away, his scrutiny intense. "Would you object if I glanced around?" Eleanor held her ground, her jaw set. "You possess no warrant, deputy. This is private property." He faltered, caught between duty and unease. Young, untried, he likely hesitated to strong-arm a grieving widow. But the rumors persisted, and pressure from the town mounted. "Just a brief look, ma'am," he pressed, his tone conciliatory. "Just to quell anxieties." Eleanor weighed her options. Refusal would only stoke the fires of suspicion, painting her as complicit. Acquiescence, a perfunctory search, might spare her. She had secreted Chaska into the storm cellar earlier, beneath the floorboards in the main room. The heavy scent of drying herbs masked any trace of sickness, and the disturbed earth had been brushed away and disguised. "Very well," she conceded, her voice laced with resignation. "But tread carefully, and don't go where you're not welcome." The deputy's face lit up. He nodded eagerly, relief flooding his features. For the next half hour, he scrutinized the house, the barn, the encompassing fields. He peered into empty stalls, tested the stability of loose planks, ran his fingers along layers of accumulated dust. Eleanor shadowed him, her heart a frantic drumbeat. He unearthed nothing. "Thank you for your cooperation, Mrs. McCrae," he said, swinging back onto his horse. He appeared almost contrite, the earlier suspicion replaced by a shame-faced grin. "Just fulfilling my duty." "Ensure you do it properly, deputy," Eleanor replied, her voice like chipped ice. He touched his hat and rode off, leaving Eleanor immersed in silence. As the dust motes settled, a wave of debilitating weariness crashed over her. She had deceived. She had knowingly misled a lawman, all to shield a man branded an enemy by her community. Retreating into the house, the magnitude of her decision bore down on her. She had crossed a Rubicon, burned a bridge. There was no turning back. She was alone, truly alone, caught between warring worlds, beholden to neither. And as she lowered the trapdoor to the root cellar, she questioned the wisdom of her choice, whether she had condemned herself to a life haunted by fear and solitude. The merging odors of soil and medicinal plants wafted upwards, a persistent reminder of the concealed secret, the danger embraced. A charm and a revelation. The air was stagnant, the only sound the lonesome lament of a dove perched atop the crumbling windmill. Eleanor stepped onto the porch, the time-worn boards protesting beneath her. The well needed checking. Its depths were dwindling at an alarming rate. A dry gust, thick with the aroma of dust and brittle sage, teased strands of her hair as she descended. That's when her gaze snagged. Nestled under the doorframe, nearly lost in the morning gloom, was something small. An instinctive flinch sent her hand towards the rifle propped against a post as she warily approached. It proved to be a charm, a meticulously constructed beadwork piece. Minute glass beads, intricately interlaced, depicted stylized lightning against an inky indigo ground. A horsehair tassel swayed gently from its base in the shifting air. Eleanor knelt, her fingers grazing the cool, polished surface. She lifted it, turning it over. The artistry was exceptional, far surpassing anything she'd encountered in town. This wasn't amateur dabbling. It spoke of expertise, heritage, a profound understanding of its medium. And it certainly wasn't hers. A cold dread coiled in her stomach. She knew, with bone-deep certainty, the charm was an offering, a token of gratitude, and there was only one conceivable source. Chaska. She retreated inside, the charm gripped like a talisman. The interior was shadowy, thick curtains warding off the desert glare. She placed the object on the kitchen table, its vibrant colors dulled by the low light. As she examined the complex pattern, splintered images flickered behind her eyes. The hushed whispers circulating in town, the deputy's nervous glances, veiled discussions of rustled herds and besieged homesteads. And always that name, uttered with mingled terror and animosity. Chaska, the Apache chief, the instigator of the raids, a phantom haunting the hills. She recalled his bearing, even injured, a serene dignity, an unflinching stare. The intricate web of scars marking his torso, each a record of skirmishes fought and won. The pride blazing in his eyes, his predatory grace, undiminished by his wounds. Everything coalesced with a sickening jolt. He wasn't merely a wounded Apache. He was the Apache, the object of their manhunt, the scapegoat for every misfortune. Eleanor slumped into a chair, her legs losing all strength. The weight of her deception, her defiance of common sense, pressed down on her, stealing her breath. Sheltering a stranger had felt risky, yes, but the scale of it. She'd imagined aiding a man in distress. Now, she recognized she was harboring a fugitive, an outlaw, a legend whispered in fearful tones. And she was now an accomplice. Her eyes drifted to the storm cellar door, tucked in the corner of the kitchen. The heavy planks seemed to mock her with their mute steadfastness, their shrouded secrets. Behind that barrier lay not just a person, but an emblem of defiance, of revolt, embodying everything the town feared and loathed. The deputy's veiled accusation rang in her ears. Asterisk, folks are saying you're helping him. Asterisk, more than just rumors, suspicions, stoked by paranoia and bigotry. And the charm's arrival confirmed them. Someone knew her secret. Someone was watching her. She shot to her feet, her heart hammering. She must think, must devise a plan. She had to protect herself, and more crucially, protect him. The sun hammered the ranch, turning the expanse into a shimmering mirage of heat and particulate. The stillness was misleading, a facade concealing the peril simmering beneath. Eleanor understood the rules had been rewritten. No longer just a solitary widow, wrestling survival from a harsh land. She was a woman trapped in the vortex of a conflict she barely grasped, a conflict threatening to swallow everything she cherished. She was isolated, utterly, completely alone. And the desert, once her sanctuary, now felt like a vast, implacable prison. The charm remained on the table, a silent indictment, a stark reminder of the choice that irreversibly redirected her existence. Divided loyalties. The beaded talisman, a small weight of consequence, pressed into her palm. Dawn bled across the horizon as Eleanor watched riders gather beyond her fence. A company, not merely a few men. A cold dread, sharper than the morning chill, clenched at her insides. She'd foreseen this, hadn't she? The inevitable price for dragging his broken form across her threshold. She'd justified it as an act of simple mercy, saving a life regardless of its origin. But the rationale, viewed in this stark light, was far more intricate. It was about Chaska. Her gaze flickered towards the room where he rested, mending. He'd be alert. Survival had sharpened his senses to a razor's edge. He'd sensed their approach. A sickening lurch twisted in her stomach. What had she unleashed? Fragments of memory assaulted her. Mrs. Abernathy's warm smile and comforting pie after Thomas's passing. Reverend Johnson's thundering sermons on fellowship filling the church. The quilting circle, needles stitching stories and secrets into fabric. They had been her anchor, her solace in this unforgiving land. Their shared lives woven into a tapestry of joy, grief, and expectation. And now this? She recalled the hushed pronouncements after each cattle theft, the blaming glances aimed towards the mountains, the inflamed pronouncements in the saloon, stoked by whiskey and bigotry. The only good Indian, they'd bellow, and she'd always averted her gaze, feigning deafness. But she had heard, and remained silent. Worse, she defied them, providing haven to the very man they sought to destroy. The riders advanced, their shapes resolving against the brightening sky. She could almost taste the gritty churn of dust, feel the palpable hum of menace. She could surrender him, claim coercion, feign ignorance. Perhaps they believe her, perhaps even forgive. The notion left a metallic tang in her mouth. She envisioned Chaska's gaze, pools of ancient understanding. The unspoken gratitude when she cleansed his injuries, a connection that eclipsed language. The beaded charm itself, a token of respect, of kinship. His quiet forbearance as she tended him, his lack of complaint, his utter absence of demands. He had accepted her aid with a dignity that dwarfed her own trepidation. He was a man, wounded and pursued, and she had granted him sanctuary. A phantom image rose. Thomas, pallid and lifeless in his coffin, draped in the flag. The toll of allegiance, the cost of service. A price she had once paid without hesitation. But this was distinct, not about nation or commitment. It struck deeper, resonating within her core. It was about empathy, about humanity, about resisting the storm of hatred and fear. Her fingers brushed against the rifle propped against the wall. It felt unwieldy, foreign. She left it untouched. Drawing herself up, she inhaled deeply, squaring her shoulders. The riders thronged at the gate, their expressions stern, their eyes like chips of flint. She knew her course. She moved towards the back room, her strides purposeful. She would confront them. She would fabricate. She would shield him, whatever the consequence. The price of kindness. Bruised hues of violet and virulent orange bled across the dawn sky, etching the desert landscape with razor-sharp clarity. Eleanor stood sentinel on the porch, Winchester nestled in her arms, the stock of cold comfort against her perspiring skin. The air, sharp with sage and the ghosts of long-gone rains, hummed with premonition. They were coming. Against the brightening east, they solidified, dark specters cresting the distant ridge, not the straggling lawmen she'd anticipated, but a disciplined host. A war party, perhaps 100 strong, astride magnificent steeds, their silhouettes painted against the nascent day like figures sprung from legend. Eleanor's fingers tightened around the rifle, knuckles bone-white. Fear, a leaden weight in her gut, grappled with steely resolution. She'd foreseen this reckoning, perhaps even courted it when she'd made her stand. Now the price loomed. A rustle behind her. Chaska. He filled the doorway, an imposing figure despite the web of bandages still clinging to his chest and arm. He moved with an easy grace that denied his weakened state. His obsidian eyes, piercing and inscrutable, locked onto the approaching riders. "They seek you," Eleanor stated, her voice devoid of inflection. "A simple fact, not blame." Chaska offered a curt nod, as I knew they would. Closer now, the riders resolved into distinct individuals, the gleam of honed steel, the stark designs adorning their faces. Their advance was measured, almost ceremonial, a silent procession of vengeance. Eleanor flickered a glance at Chaska. His gaze met hers, his expression an enigma. He waited, waiting for her decision. I can't hold them all off," she breathed, the words swallowed by the vastness. He joined her on the porch, his presence a palpable force beside her. The scent of campfire smoke mingled with something primal, something intrinsically wild, radiated from him. A warrior, unbroken, even outnumbered and hurting. "I require no such sacrifice," Chaska rumbled, his voice a low thrum against her bones. He spoke in measured English, faintly accented, yet imbued with undeniable earnestness. "You have spared my life, woman. No debt remains." He pivoted to face her, dark eyes holding hers captive. "You offered sanctuary. You showed compassion. Such things are remembered." A fleeting nuance, a hint of gratitude, softened his rugged features. Then the unspoken question hung, suspended between them, thick as the desert air. A choice lay bare. "I offer two paths," Chaska continued, his voice regaining its command. "The first, you reveal my presence. They will claim me. You will be left untouched. Your generosity disregarded." He paused, allowing the implications to settle. The riders were almost upon them, a silent, implacable tide. "The second," he continued, his unwavering gaze never leaving hers. "You stand with me. You declare, I am under your protection. Understand the cost. Grasp the peril." The silence stretched, brittle and suffocating. Eleanor registered the frantic hammering of her pulse, the shallow rasp of her breaths. Close enough now to discern details, the intricate braiding of feathers in their hair, the implacable resolve carved into their countenances. She looked at Chaska, at the resolute line of his jaw, the quiet potency that emanated from him. He was offering an out, a return to the life she had known. But that existence felt distant, unreal, and she knew, with a sudden, stark clarity that resonated deep within her core, that there could be no turning back. She lifted her chin, meeting Chaska's intensity head-on. The rifle felt unwieldy in her grasp, no longer a symbol of safety, but a burden. "What if I reject both?" Chaska's smile lacked warmth. "There is but one decision here, Eleanor McCrae. You have already made it." A silent agreement. Eleanor gripped the Winchester, its familiar weight a small comfort against the dread creeping through her. Hooves hammered the parched earth, a growing thunder announcing the riders' arrival. They materialized from the shimmering heat, a painted sickle of warriors whose quiet intensity eclipsed any battle cry. Miniature cyclones of dust mimicked the turmoil churning in her stomach. Chaska stood at her side, a stoic figure against the rider's flamboyant display. His dark gaze remained fixed, an unspoken apology for the danger he'd drawn to her doorstep. The bandage at his shoulder was pristine, his movements guarded, yet his very stance radiated resilience despite his injuries. The leader, his face a roadmap of weathered authority, reined in his mount a dozen yards away. Older than the rest, streaks of silver threaded through his hair, and his eyes held a penetrating scrutiny. He assessed Eleanor with an inscrutable gaze. She met his stare, her face a rigid mask. No flinch, no raised rifle, just solid ground beneath her boots. The prairie wind clawed at her skirt and hair, carrying the sharp scent of sage, sun-baked earth, and a primal wildness she recognized. The silence stretched, thick as molasses, punctuated only by snorting steeds and the groan of saddle leather. It echoed with years of conflict, of failures to understand, of bloodshed. a silence that screamed of stolen heritage and betrayed trust. His voice, when it came, was a low rasp, each word clipped and precise. This is Chaska's refuge. Not a query, but a statement. Eleanor offered no reply. What could she offer? Denial? Defense? Her choice was made. Verbiage was futile. Chaska shifted forward, his tone a deep resonance. I am Chaska. My actions are mine to account for. The leader's gaze flicked to Chaska, his eyes narrowing like a hawk spotting prey. A fleeting emotion flickered there, perhaps respect, perhaps the grim acceptance of inevitability. He spoke then in his native tongue, a rapid, guttural exchange lost on Eleanor. Chaska responded in kind, his voice controlled. Their dialogue unfurled like an ancient scroll, each word carefully weighed. Eleanor remained still, the rifle an anchor in her hands. She watched the impassive faces that taught bodies. She understood that a single tremor of fear, a misplaced gesture, could detonate everything. At last, the leader fell silent. His gaze returned to Eleanor, lingering for a long moment on her face. Then, a sharp nod, and he wheeled his horse around. His warriors followed, their movements a synchronized flow of muscle and hide. They vanished into the shimmering haze, leaving only swirling dust devils in their wake. Eleanor held her breath until the last rider disappeared beyond the horizon. Only then did she lower the Winchester. The ensuing silence was different, lighter, pregnant with anticipation. The sun hammered down, blistering the porch wood, beating sweat on her forehead. Chaska turned, his eyes questioning, searching for an assurance she wasn't sure she could give. He reached out, his hand hovering hesitantly. She looked at him, at the deep lines etched by hardship, the unwavering strength in his gaze. Not an adversary, but a man scarred by wounds both seen and unseen. A man hunted, betrayed, and left to die. She lowered the rifle, propping it against the rail. Then she took his hand. His fingers were rough, bearing the marks of work, yet his grip was surprisingly gentle. He squeezed, a silent covenant sealed between them. No words were spoken. Silence filled the gaps between them. In the crucible of danger and defiance, a tacit understanding was reached. Together, they would confront whatever the future held. The wind rose again, swirling dust around their boots. The sun climbed, stretching long shadows across the thirsty earth. The ranch stood in watchful silence, waiting. Alone again. A somber procession topped the ridge overlooking the ranch, their silhouettes stark against the nascent dawn. Eleanor gripped the Winchester, its steel a frigid counterpoint to her sweating palms. Perhaps 24 figures, their expressions flinty, rode into view, the nascent sun igniting their rifle barrels like torches. She knew most of them, farmers, merchants, faces familiar from Sunday service and marketplace haggling. Now, their gazes held a frost that cut deeper than any winter gust. They eschewed flanking maneuvers, foregoing any attempt to encircle the house. Instead, they advanced directly, a united front fueled by perceived injustice. The only sounds were the nervous snorts of the horses and the rustle of saddle leather. They halted a respectful distance from a porch, their mounts shuffling and pawing the earth. Jedediah Grimes, the blacksmith, a man sculpted from iron and grit, swung down first. He was their voice, the embodiment of their collective will. He approached her, his face a grim mask of disappointment. Eleanor, he rumbled, his voice a low, grating rasp. We need to speak. She didn't lower the rifle. I expect you do, Jedediah. We know he found refuge here, Grimes stated, with a flick of his wrist towards the house. The Apache. Chaska. Eleanor remained impassive, her focus unwavering. Let them articulate their accusation. Let them shatter the tentative peace of the morning. Where is he, Eleanor? Martha Endicott's voice sliced through the air, a keen edge of hysteria sharpening her words. Endicott had recently suffered livestock losses and likely pinned the blame on Chaska. He's gone, Eleanor replied, her voice even. The falsehood, left a bitter residue, yet she offered it. A ripple of whispers spread through the group. Jedediah raised a hand, silencing the murmurs. "Gone where?" "That's my concern," she countered, tightening her hold on the rifle. "It becomes our concern when you provide sanctuary to a murderer." "Eleanor," a voice called from the rear. "He was injured," she said, her tone gaining strength. "I rendered aid." "Aid?" Martha Endicott screeched. "You aided the savage who robs us of our livelihoods and slays our kin." "He killed no one here." Eleanor's tone was unwavering, resolute. She trod a fragile path, yet retreat was impossible. Jedediah moved closer. "Eleanor, we always held you as God-fearing. How could you betray our trust so completely?" The question hung suspended, weighted with accusation. Betrayal. That was their interpretation. Not empathy, not humanity, but stark betrayal. "I acted according to my conscience," she answered, her voice hushed. "Conscience?" Jedediah spat, the gesture vulgar. "Conscience would have been to deliver him to us. Conscience would have been to permit us to dispense justice." "And what justice would that have been, Jedediah?" she challenged, her eyes narrowing into slits. "A fair trial? Or a lynching from the nearest branch?" The ensuing quiet was thick with unspoken truths, an admission hanging in the air like smoke. Jedediah offered no reply, his silence speaking volumes, reinforced by the hard, implacable expressions etched on their faces. "You've made your decision, Eleanor," Jedediah finally said, his tone devoid of warmth. "Now you'll bear the consequences." He addressed the gathering. "Let's ride." They turned their mounts, their faces averted, shielding their gazes from her. Gone were the casual greetings, the offered assistance, the shared smiles. Only icy, brutal rejection remained. As they departed, Martha Endicott's spittle landed at Eleanor's feet. "Harlot," she spat, her voice dripping with venom. Eleanor watched them recede, the swirling dust from their horses' hooves forming a shroud of animosity and judgment. She stood, alone, the rifle a cold extension of her arm, the desert silence closing around her like a vice. The sun ascended, painting the heavens with vibrant strokes of gold and crimson, yet the warmth eluded her. A chill settled within her, a coldness unrelated to the air. She was alone, again, but this time the isolation was self-imposed. She had chosen Chaska, chosen her convictions, chosen to defy the expectations of the only society she had ever known. She surveyed the boundless expanse of a New Mexico territory. It felt even more vast, even more desolate. She lifted her chin, inhaled deeply, and re-entered the house. Work beckoned. Fences required repair, cattle needed tending, a life demanded rebuilding. Yet the weight of their condemnation lingered, a heavy mantle she would carry for the foreseeable future. The price of her choice was levied, and the cost of her defiance was solitude. She was now an outcast, marked, ostracized, left to grapple with the implications of her compassion in a world that offered little room for it. The land remembers. The sun, a brutal reminder of the day's start, found Eleanor already stirring. An old ache needled her joints, an unwelcome but familiar greeting. The posse had evaporated with the dawn, leaving behind only the venom of their accusations, sharp on her tongue like unripe berries. Sheltering a killer, Jedediah had snarled, his face a mask of self-righteous fury. Choosing a savage over kin, ignoring the barbs, she plunged into the rhythm of her morning chores. The clucking demands of the chickens, the lowing of the milk cows, the endless thirst of the well. Each task a calculated act, a defiant whisper against the encroaching silence. Her movements were honed by years of relentless work, each gesture a testament to endurance. As she labored, her thoughts drifted back to the wounded stranger she'd found that night. She hadn't questioned her motives then and wouldn't now. A man was bleeding out. She possessed the means to staunch the flow. It was a simple equation, devoid of malice or calculation. But the town had cast it as perfidy. Leaning against the weathered barn, she paused, a flicker of doubt in her eyes. Had she erred? Hesitation, like a tenacious vine, threatened her convictions. Her gaze swept across the land, a panorama of mesas and canyons bleeding into the horizon. This harsh country had witnessed everything: skirmishes, famines, shattered hopes. It had tested her spirit, even broken it at times, but ultimately, it had forged her resilience. The land remained indifferent to Jedediah Grimes and the town's small-minded grievances. It knew nothing of sides or loyalties. It only acknowledged survival. And Eleanor McCrae, like the tenacious juniper clinging to the craggy slopes, was a survivor born of this landscape. She straightened, the doubt beginning to ebb. The consequences of her choice were hers alone. She refused to apologize for the compassion that lived in her bones, for the stubborn streak that ran through her. Let the town revile her, denounce her. They could not steal her self-respect. The ensuing days fell into a pattern of stark solitude. Eleanor strengthened fences, hacked away at encroaching weeds, and diligently watched over her dwindling herd. Though unseen and unheard, she felt the weight of their censure, a palpable pressure in the air. Her supplies thinned, yet she stubbornly avoided town. She would manage. She always had. One sunset, as the sky ignited in a blaze of crimson and violet, she sat on her porch, a mug of tepid coffee warming her hands. The only sound were the rhythmic creak of the swing and a distant coyote's lament. She wondered about Chaska, hoping he was safe and that he understood her actions were not about him, but about the woman she strived to be. From her pocket, she retrieved the locket, a simple adornment gifted by her departed husband, Thomas. Inside nestled a faded portrait of him, his gaze forever fixed on some far-off dream. She flipped it open, her thumb tracing the contours of his face. He would have grasped her choice, she believed. He always had possessed that rare understanding. She closed the locket, letting it dangle from its chain, the silver catching the last vestiges of light. A memento of her past, a reminder of her grief, yet also a symbol of her unyielding spirit. The locket, like the land, possessed memory. It held the echoes of joy and sorrow, of her love for Thomas, and the kindness she extended to Chaska. The wind gathered force, whispering through the cottonwoods lining the creek, a murmur of secrets carried on the breeze. The land remembered, and in its vast, silent memory, Eleanor discovered a measure of peace. Alone, yes, but far from broken. Marked, perhaps, but not defeated. Leaving the porch, the locket swaying against her, she inhaled the sharp desert air. Night had fallen, the stars ablaze, the land stretching out before her, an immensity both brutal and beautiful. This was her home, and she would remain.